Okay, welcome back to another meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton. I'm your host, Keisha Hamilton, DEI consultant, training specialist. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Civil rights activist, mom to 6, and your speaker for tonight. So tonight we're going to talk about the things we always talk about: diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. Everything that we talk about is information around those subjects. Tonight, we're going to be talking about course correct. So some of you who follow my page regularly, you saw that I put up a post here recently, I think a couple of days ago, where I put the question that I put on the post was course correct, but for how long? How long are we course correcting for? Okay, I can't do that. All right. And then not only with course correcting, just for how long. So let's go ahead and get our definitions out of the way so that we can get right into the other subject. Again, I like to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, give a definition of each of them each week. Likewise, Pastor Young, give a definition of them each week, because there are so many people who still today just really don't fully comprehend them, don't fully understand them. And so just explaining them so that if someone just comes onto my, video, at any point, they'll have the definitions and understand what they mean, going forward. So what is diversity? We talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. Good evening, Tremaine. It's good to see you. We talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. What is diversity? What is equity? What is inclusion? So you understand that diversity is the differences. We talk about those all the time. It's much more than just how you look, how you visually show up to people. Our differences that we like to focus on a little bit more here on a meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton are the differences of your ideology. So how you were raised, what lens you see life through, because all of those things that are, your ideology, what's inside, what's in your brain, that's what guides your action. It guides your decisions. It guides your thought processes. So all of those differences they can be vast. So you can even have 2 children who've grown up in the same home and have different ideologies about things, for whatever reasons. But imagine you grew up in, 2 different communities, 2 different, existences, then imagine the differences of opinion that you'll have in that space. So diversity is related to your difference. Clearly, diversity does relate to your visual, but especially on here, we like to talk about and think about how you think in relation to what you do, why you do what you do. And then understanding that there are other people who have a completely different set of thought processes that, govern how they do what they do. What is equity? That's the E in DEI. So equity is an acknowledgement and an awareness of barriers that are in place, and a commitment. So, to be committed to equity, so I guess I'll say that, but it is an awareness of the barriers, and then a commitment to eliminating those barriers so that people don't have them. So a lot of times you'll hear people saying things like, equity is giving a person what they need to succeed, and that is correct. Equity is giving a person what they need to succeed. In order to give a person what they need to succeed, you've got to know what they need. And in order to know what they need, oftentimes, you need to understand why they don't have what they need. And that is the acknowledgement and the awareness of the barriers that are in place, keeping people from getting what they need to receive. So, for example, you'll hear me often say on a meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton that equity is not fair, because it is not. Equity is not fair. Equity is not equality. A lot of people like to, think that they're similar, and they're not. They are and they aren't. Equality is basically equal. It's saying, people are saying I'm all hungry, and that's a bad one. I'm not going to use that example because that's a bad one. People are saying that, I need transportation to get to work, so we'll go with our transportation one because I always use it. And in that transportation definition that I give all the time, you have 2 people who need transportation. One person needs a bike to get to work, and the other person needs a car. If we were talking about equality, we would give each of the people a bike. We'd say we've given each of you transportation to get to work, or we'd give each of them the amount of money needed to purchase a bike, you know, or to just purchase transportation. So we might tell the person who needs a bike, we're going to give you $5,000 for your transportation. We'll tell the person who needs a car, we're going to give you $5,000 for your car. We have been equal in that instance. In equality, there's also this excess and bad stewardship of our monies, okay? So the person who needs a bike does not need $5,000 towards their bike. They just don't. The person who needs a car likely needs more than $5,000 for their car. But in your equality, in your quest for equality, in your commitment to equality, you've given one person more than they need and the other person less than they need. But in equity, which is again different than equality, in equity, you'll give that person who needs a bike $1,000 because that's all they need towards their bike. And they can get their bike license, and they might even be able to get extra inner tubes, you know, should one, you know, so they get a hole or something in the other one. Maybe a bike chain to lock it up, maybe even a helmet, you know, and you all who ride bikes, you probably can tell me that the better amounts for those, but go with my numbers for now. And then the person who needs a car, they get maybe $10,000 for a car. Now in equality, clearly that's not equal, a person getting 1,000 and a person getting 10,000. But in equity, you're giving them what they need to succeed, and then you become equitable. Same thing, I give the other definition at times about my two girls. I have 6 children, I mentioned, 4 girls and 2 boys. I have an older girl, my oldest child is a girl, my youngest child is a girl. My oldest child, you know, she's graduating from high school and working and so she's asking questions about purchasing homes and, you know, stuff like that, stuff that, you know, adults do at the age of 19 when they're, you know, attempting to, you know, adult. Well, my 7-year-old, because that's my youngest child, she does not ask me about buying houses. She does not ask me about buying cars. She wants to sleep with me on occasion because mommy does not let her sleep with her because she's wild. But if I were to attempt to give my oldest child what my youngest child wants / needs, you know, if I said to my oldest child, you can sleep with me tonight, she would look at me crazy because that's not what she's ever going to do. She doesn't prefer that. Aside from me not preferring, but she doesn't prefer it either. Whereas my baby, if I go to her and talk to her about houses, I'm not giving either of them what they need. But if I give my youngest child the option to sleep with mommy at night, and I talk to my oldest child about houses, now I'm giving them what they need to succeed. Okay, so it's very important that we, in equity and in your organizations, that you think, as you're thinking about your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and planning and et cetera, that you do not, one, take equity away from there. You know, I had some organizations who felt like equity was not as important. They thought that diversity and inclusion was where it's at. If you don't have equity in your initiatives, you have nothing, okay? You're not going to get anywhere without equity. There's an imbalance in our world that equity is the only way it will come to some sort of balance. You have to have equity. Everything you do is underlined and undergirded and upheld and held together by equity, okay? You have to have equity, and you have to have the idea, the correct definition of equity, and that is giving a person what they need to succeed. That oftentimes, it oftentimes look and is unfair. People will complain about that. People will be upset about that. You can't go. I was at a city meeting last night talking about racism and its impacts on the Black and brown community and how we need to address these impacts. And another individual got up after and said, all those things that she just said are wrong. We can't do those things because they're unfair, basically. That's basically what his real complaint was. He didn't necessarily use those words, but that's basically what he was saying. And you're going to hear that all day, every day, depending on what circles you're in. Equity is not fair. So oftentimes, many people feel like, you know, you're taking from me what I don't need. Mind you, they don't need it anyways, but you're giving them more, despite the fact that I don't need what you're giving them. But they're still getting more than me, and that's not fair. And I'm gonna complain about that. And I'm going to make a fuss about that. So if you, in your diversity and inclusion initiatives, are thinking that you can do without equity because of the complaints, or thinking that, you know, you won't get complaints, prepare yourself for the complaints and understand that it is the most important piece to diversity, equity, inclusion. It is what drives and guides all diversity and inclusion. And belonging. Some of you have these ideas that you want to have belonging, and no offense to belonging or anything else of the sort. Different people creating this stuff, which, you know, again, they're appropriate and important in their own way. You're not getting any of those correctly if you don't have equity. Okay, that's very important, and we can spend, lots of time on equity for how important it is, but we won't. Inclusion. What is inclusion? Inclusion is having a seat at the table. So now inclusion, we're talking about why it's so important, because it is as well. All of these are very important. But in inclusion, it's having a seat at the table. You don't only have a seat at the table or any table. So when we think about a table, we think about policy, we think about creation, we think about decision making, we think about the people who are creating and deciding, right? These are the final decision makers who are sitting at these tables. When you go for an interview, where are you going to? Generally a table. You know, you're on one side, they're on the other. You think of the boardroom where decisions are made. It's generally done around a table. So when we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about people having a seat at the table, Black and brown individuals who have been historically excluded, having a seat at the table. Not only having a seat at the table where these decisions and things are being made, but they have power and access. So for many, many years, having a seat at the table looked like tokenism. Today, oftentimes, having a seat at the table looks like tokenism. Okay, tokenism is simply where you put a person at the table. You think of your children, any of you who all have children or nieces or nephews or whoever else. Imagine your 4 or 5-year-old daughter having a tea party, and she has all her teddy bears sitting, having a seat at the table. They all have a seat at the table, right? Because, that's how girls do with their tea parties. I enjoy tea parties and have had them with my babies and things when they were younger. You have a seat at the table. These bears have a seat at the table. Oftentimes, our inclusion efforts look exactly like a young girl having a tea party when we are trying to include diverse populations. They're sitting at the table like a teddy bear. There's no sound from them. There's no contribution from them. We don't expect any. We don't even welcome any contribution from them. And it's also generally just one of them in a room of a bunch of people who look absolutely nothing like them. Okay, that's not inclusion. Inclusion is not only having a seat at the table, it's also having a voice at the table. It's also having a part of whatever is created. So consensus is a good word to use, to think of when we're talking about, and it is and it isn't, okay? Because, but in the space where it is a good word, when you are creating things and the people who are at the table, all of their voices, one, are not represented, and their thought processes are not included in whatever is represented, then you don't have an inclusive creation, okay? The decision has not been made where everybody has contributed to it. Having a seat at the table, and this is where equity comes in at, having enough voices at the seat of the table where it will balance out whatever's being created is important. And that's when you have actual inclusion. Not only am I at the table, there are enough of me at the table, and whatever we're saying is incorporated into whatever has been created. That's when you have inclusion. People don't want that, though. That's not what you oftentimes see in individuals' inclusion efforts. Okay, they want to just basically tokenize. They want to have a tea party, a little girl's tea party with our, they want to have a little girl's tea party at their decision-making tables. So when you talk about true inclusion, make sure that you not only have those people at the table, that you have enough of those people at the table, and that whatever they're talking about, whatever they're saying, whatever contributions they're bringing to that space, whatever ways they want to shift that decision-making that needs to be shifted to incorporate whatever they are bringing, make sure that that's how you're doing it. And it's going to look different than what you're doing. It's going to look different than what you generally create. It's going to look different than best practices. It's going to look different than what's professional, because what we've had heretofore has always been based off of whiteness and white supremacy. Okay, and we've talked about that numerous times. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but remember that when you're talking about inclusion, you don't want to have a girls' tea party. Okay, Racism. What is racism? We like to define that as well. It's the marginalization and oppression of people of color based on constructed racial hierarchy. It privileges white folks and it is coupled with power. So where racism is different than prejudice, because people confuse the two. Prejudice is simply the same thing until it's not the same thing. So prejudice is where you're basically prejudging a person based off of superficial, things, or even stereotypes. You can prejudge people because of stereotypes and whatever, right? Well, what prejudice does not have that makes it not racism is it does not have power. It's not connected to legal ramifications, okay? It's not connected as widely and as it's not embedded like racism is. So what's that mean? So racism, it is, like I said, socially constructed. That means somewhere, somebody in some back room at some point in time decided that we need to categorize these people. And the best way to do that would be to categorize based on color. And once we do that, then we're going to make laws and policies and et cetera that ensure that these people who we've decided are lower than stay low, and that these people who we decided are higher than they stay high. Racism, that creation of it has changed throughout the years. So at some point in time, Mexicans were considered white. White people coming from like the Irish, immigrants were considered not white. They were not white. Eventually they became white because of, again, it's a social construct in deciding who gets to be in the club, the white club, and who doesn't, okay? So that's basically what racism is. But it also is coupled with power. So it's baked into our laws. It says that, at one point in time, African-Americans were 3/5 human. Okay, it said that, once, with Jim Crow, that, you couldn't use certain fountains, and you couldn't sit in certain spaces on the bus. And if you did, disobey those Jim Crow laws, yes, selective assimilation, yes. If you did disobey those Jim Crow laws, then racism, what makes it different than prejudice, those laws that were created to disadvantage others, to discriminate against others, to, harm others, you could get in trouble. So if you come and sit at the table, and many of you, you could really be looking on Google, at anything in the 60s and 50s, and, people trying to integrate these lunch counters and see, white people screaming and yelling and throwing food and et cetera at these peaceful Black and brown individuals who were trying to integrate into these spaces. And the white folks didn't get in trouble for it. You know what's crazy about it? So the white folks did not get in trouble for all that violence that they committed against Black and brown individuals who were trying to integrate, because, we did have laws that said, okay, this stuff is not fair anymore. And so we need to, it was never fair, but, we need to fix it. And so some very brave, strong, powerful, Black individuals said that we're going to be some of the first to try to integrate these spaces, and these white people were literally losing their minds and harming them. And because our laws for so long were based off of, and are still based off of racism, they could commit all that violence and not get in trouble for it. What's crazy about that is today, in 2021, white individuals, whiteness can commit all kinds of violence and not get in trouble for it. Makes you wonder about our laws. Okay, we're gonna go on though. We talked about racism, and I'm getting to that point where I'm supposed to be at my topic for tonight. I'll briefly talk about anti-racism. What is it? Anti-racism is simply actively and intentionally working to dismantle and oppose racism. That's simply what anti-racism is. Anti-racism is everything for today. It is how you actually implement diversity, equity, and inclusion, okay? So many people get lost and confused, and this is by design, because, when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, when we're talking about the true and real implementation of it, what you have right now is going to change, is going to look different. And whiteness, we've talked about what whiteness is. I think I talked about that last week. excuse me, whiteness does not want to be changed. It does not want to share. It does not want equity. It does not want to change. And so what it does to avoid changing is it requires assimilation. You know, it requires integration. It requires all these different things, right? It says whatever's created out there, whatever you all come up with, in order for it to be approved, we've got to approve. You got to come through us. That's what whiteness says, okay? Well, true diversity, equity, and inclusion, it will not go through whiteness. It cannot go through whiteness, okay? Whiteness cannot be the decider of when it actually is, when we've arrived. It just can't be. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So anti-racism basically is, you know, an awareness of racism and deciding to actively dismantle and oppose it. Okay. And again, if your diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives in your organizations, in your businesses, in your churches, in yourself are not governed and not through the lens of anti-racism, then you're likely not getting it right. Okay, let's go on to what we're going to talk about this week, because it'll come back in with some of that. Course correct. Some of you, like I said, you see on my page, I put the only way to intentionally disrupt, you know, what we have is you have to course correct, right? You've got to intentionally, you know, you're going in one direction and you intentionally go in another direction, right? Course correct. But how long must we course correct? So intentional disruption, we'll talk about what it means to course correct, okay? What does that mean first, and then we'll get into how long it takes. What does it mean to intentionally course correct? Well, it means to be intentional about it. So you've got to know what you're doing. You've got to prepare for disruption. And Pastor Mike, you're right. Power does not give itself up. And I forget, I have a quote on my page. I forget it when I'm in the midst of talking. But one of our Black and brown greats, Black greats at some point in time said that, I think it was Martin Luther King, but I could be wrong, that I think it was actually Frederick Douglass, I think. But anyways, though, something to the effect that you know, power never gives up anything. You have to demand it, and then you have to take it. Okay, you got to take power, because power is not giving itself up. You know what I mean? So in intentional disruption, the way that you truly change, you got to actively do something different. It can't be the same. So, you know, insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. Okay. If the same thing looks like, you know, if you've gone through your DEI stuff, initiatives in your organization, and your boardroom still looks the same, you're not doing something right. If your vice presidents, your VP suite team, if they all look the same after you've gone through your diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, you're not doing something right. If your supervisors, your middle managers all look the same, if your assistant pastors, if everybody who you hang around, the music that you listen to, the people that you hang out with, the places that you go to all look the same after you supposedly woke up, it's not, you didn't do it right. You got to do something different. It's going to look different. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Thank you, Tremaine. Correct. I think was that Frederick Douglass? I forget. But if your stuff looks the same after you have actively and supposedly, you know, done all this reading and this writing and this studying and this going to conferences and listening to a meeting of diverse minds with Keisha Hamilton, if everything in your life looks the same, then you have not done something right. Okay. You can't be reading books, watching videos, bringing experts in to talk to you, talk to your organizations, talk to your people, you know, supporting Black life, Black businesses, you know, if nothing looks the different after you've done all that, then you've done something wrong. Okay. There should be a marked difference in you, the people you keep company around, the conversations you hold, the way you talk, you know, the expectations that you have. It should be a marked difference. People should notice it. At some point, all the learning needs to lead to disruption. Okay, it needs to lead to a change. It needs to lead to you saying, you know what, nope, that's not the way. It needs to lead to people looking at you kind of funny at times. People need to be looking at you funny. People who normally where, you know, you all were on the same page, I had the same thought processes. At some point, when you've done all your learning and you actually decide that I'm actually going to do this, it needs to, some people who are looking on need to say, okay, something wrong with you. You know, have you changed? And you should be saying yes, and you should be taking it as a cue that maybe maybe you're doing something right. At some point, you need to be the voice in the room that is not heard as much. This is for whiteness, okay? Remember that, you know, we are consistently to this day, today, you know, not given space to speak. We are consistently to this day, you know, we will speak and nobody will listen. And then the next person whose skin tone is much lighter than ours will say the exact same thing and everybody will think it's genius. You need to be the voice in the room that's saying, hey, look, she just said that, he just said that, and we want to hear more from you on that. And everybody needs to listen. That's what you need to be doing in those rooms when it's working, when we're no longer just attempting to course correct because we're just studying. Now make no mistake, study is vital. It has to occur in order for, you know, you to actually do some real change. But you, at some point, you got to move on from studying. You know, we can chew gum and walk at the same time. People remember that, okay? At some point, you have to comb through your policy manuals with a fine-tooth racial equity lens. And likely you're going to find that you just need to burn them all and start over. And that's okay. At some point, you've got to do that. You've got to say, I've done enough studying. Now it's time for me to get to work. Now I'm about to comb through this racial equity, this policy manual with a racial equity lens, and I'm about to fix this stuff. Okay? At some point, you need to fire some people. Some people need to be fired. They do. Listen to me. What whiteness is not afraid to do is fire Black and brown individuals when they don't fit the culture, when you know, white woman is crying tears of white tears because she was checked by a Black woman. Like, what whiteness is not afraid to do is fire Black and brown individuals. But what it will not do when it comes to whiteness is it doesn't want to harm itself. It doesn't want to check itself. It doesn't want to correct itself. If your course correcting never includes you firing individuals who are causing extreme harm in your organizations, one, this idea that you know, that you're trying to save money and you're trying to be efficient and you want the best person for the job is a total lie, because individual who's causing a lot of harm and they have these individuals on these jobs, you probably can count on 5 hands how many individuals in your organizations, depending on the size of your organization, are a problem, are causing you to lose money, and who you refuse to check, who you refuse to hold accountable. And most of these individuals, I don't know that they're ever any other color, but most of these individuals are white or espouse whiteness values. They act white, they think white, they respond and do, you know, they uphold whiteness, okay? If you're not willing to fire people, if you haven't lost some relationships because of your course correcting, then you're probably not doing DEI right. You're probably still just gathering, just reading. Like, at some point you gotta, you know, at some point you gotta move, right? At some point you've got to make a change. At some point you may have to join a protest. Now, protests are, and I know that's a scary word, protest, don't let it be, okay? I protest all the time, okay? Business does not do me right, speaks wrong to me, I'm not going back to business, okay? That business, okay? You talk disrespectful to me and I know you did it, you know, I'm watching you and I see how you treat other people and you treat me wrong. I'm no longer one. There's a sign that, you know, back in the 60s, I think it came out, you know, don't buy where you won't be, don't buy where you won't be hired. I think there's a sign. You know, don't shop where you won't be hired. I think that's a sign. For some of our white people, you need to say, I'm not going to shop. I won't shop where Black people aren't hired. I won't shop where Black people aren't welcome. Black and brown individuals, if they're not welcome here, if I don't see them in your organizations, if I know that this environment is not welcoming to them, I'm not going to keep I'm upholding white supremacy by giving you my money, by coming here to shop. I'm not shopping there. At some point, your course correcting has to, you know, it's got to do something. You got to do something with it. Let's go on to how long. How long should we be course correcting? How long should we be protesting in whatever way we're choosing to protest? Sometimes it might be on the street with our fists held up, sometimes it might be. Other times it might just be, I'm not shopping where Black folks aren't welcome, where brown folks aren't welcome. That's a protest, and it happens. Sometimes it's, those different ways. But for how long are we doing this? We're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism in your organizations, in yourself, in your businesses, in your churches. How long are you course correcting? How much time does it take for us to learn and to embrace the stuff and then become a part of us? How long does that take? So it needs to become your way of life. When I was studying, I just was looking online to say, how long does it take to learn a new skill? And one of the things that it said was it takes about 6 months or more to learn a new skill. Now, mind you, it takes me longer than 3 years, 2 years. I said it took me longer than 2 years of classes in Spanish class to learn Spanish, because today I still don't know Spanish, and I've been out of class for a very long time. But that speaks to another part of how long it takes. How long does it take, and how much of it does it take? What does it take to actually learn a new language? So I'm going to tell you what it took me at the age of 12 years old to learn how to press hair. Now, some of my white friends who are on and white colleagues who are listening, or whoever else, you might not know what it means to press hair, and that's okay, I'm going to tell you. Some of my Black folks who are on, who are younger, have no idea what a pressing comb is, because everybody into perming their hair, okay? Well, I was one of those people who pressed hair. I've never had a perm. I had a perm at the age of, through the age of 9. And then after that, I never got a perm again. And I'm much older than 9 at this time. So when I was coming up in the 90s, I had to press my hair. So a pressing comb is what we use. It's basically a hot comb. It's like I think it's a steel comb. It's like a steel comb with teeth in it, real small teeth. You put it on the stove, get it hot, comb your hair out, and you press it, okay? At the age of 12, my mother told me, she said, I'm not doing your hair anymore. Now, I was a particular kid, okay? I like my hair to be done. That was one area that I'm like, if I just want, at least when people see my face, that I look decent, okay? That was my one thing, right? So my mother would press my hair, and at the age of 12, she said, I'm no longer pressing your hair. Okay, I can't get my hair pressed. So the first time I went to press my hair, I heated the comb like I thought she was doing it. Now this analogy, okay, I'm gonna work this back to DEI and anti-racism, because you need to get it. The first time I pressed my hair, I heated up the comb on the stove. Usually it's we had a gas stove, so the fire's open, and put the comb on there, and you got to heat the comb up to get it hot and warm. That's where it comes a hot comb at. You press the heat is what makes your hair straight. Heated the comb up and went to press my hair with it. Took my hair, held it right here, and put the comb in there. And everything from that point on was burned out. The comb was too hot. But of course, I thought I had done it right. I remember watching how my mother would do my hair. She'd put the comb on the eye. She'd come through my hair, and it would eventually get straight. No, not my first time. It did not do that. I put it in, and everything from that point was burnt out, singed. It took all my hair out. I never made that mistake again. Let me be clear. But I didn't learn right away. I learned not to let the comb be that hot. I learned that just because the comb is not smoking doesn't mean that it's not hot. It's actually probably too hot. So I learned those things. I learned to use a piece of tissue and test it to see, what color is it turning the tissue. I learned all those things, right? Let me tell you how often I press my hair. Within about 2 years, I was a G at it, okay? I'm still a G. When it comes to, and that G is just the GOAT. When it comes to pressing hair, if they had like Olympics for who can press hair and not burn anybody while you're pressing hair, because that's a thing that happens when you're pressing hair. You get your burnt ears, okay? You burn all around. If they had an Olympics for who can press hair without burning, I would be one of the top 3, because I do very, very good at it, okay? I got very, very good at it, because I did it almost every day for the first 2 years. Now, some of y'all who on here who do hair, know that means my hair was probably pretty damaged from touching it so much. I sweat in my head, so I wanted it to be straight. So, but anyways, though, aside from that, it took me about 2 years to get very good at it. Not only did I get very good at it in those 2 years, I did it almost every single day. I watched other people. I asked questions. I watched people who was doing it. You know, I would look and watch, how are you doing that? You know, how are you not? What are you doing? Oh, you have them hold their ear. Okay, so that's a skill that that's a trait that I can, you know, add into my, you know, how do you press hair kit? You know what I mean? Okay, so the hot comb, you got to put it on the heat this way. Oh, to easily cool it off, you put it in some water real quick. Like all these different tips that I had to learn in my quest to know how to press hair real good. I did that. But I immersed myself in pressing hair. When we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, for people, for one, now mind you, pressing hair is in the Black community, okay? Ooh, I'm about to forget her name. I just forgot her name. I just had it on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember her name right now. But many of you, she's the first woman to have earned $1 million. I forget her name. I'm gonna remember when I'm done with this show. But she's the first woman in America to have earned $1 million, to make $1 million, and she earned it off of her pressing comb. Okay, she introduced the pressing comb. I forget her name. But in my quest to learn it, I had to immerse myself in it. This is a part of my culture, though. Okay, so it didn't take me, you know, what it might have taken for somebody else. And mind you, this is a skill we're talking about. I'm not necessarily talking about a mind shift. Okay. That takes even longer. I'm not talking about a mind shift, but I'm talking about learning a skill. How long does it take anybody to learn a skill? It took me about 2 years to learn it. But in that time frame, I was studying it almost every single day, you know, pressing my hair, pressing other folks' hair. I eventually learned how to curl hair real good. All these different things that I learned to do in that process because I immersed myself in it. When you're talking about diversity, CJ Walker, thank you so much, Ms. Martin. CJ Walker is the woman who made over, is the first woman millionaire in America. And she's a Black woman, you know, and again, she brought the pressing comb to us. But anyway, so when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, how long should you be, you know, incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion? Is it simply just a year-long program? You bring in, you know, a specialist for a year and say, okay, you come in, look at our stuff, teach us a couple things, and then, you know, go, you know, and then that once that year is up, then we're done, we're good, we're ready to go. Not at all. Okay. We're talking about mind shifts. How long does it take a person to learn Spanish? It takes you some time, especially if you're not immersed in it or you never learn it. Like me, I've had a few years of it, and I still just know a couple of words, right? I didn't immerse myself in it. Where there are some people who did it right. They immersed themselves in it. They speak Spanish to other individuals. They're, constantly studying it. They're listening to things in Spanish. They've immersed themselves in it. They hang out with Spanish-speaking individuals. They, you know, visit Spanish-speaking countries, locations. They immerse themselves in it. When we're talking diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism stuff, you have to immerse yourself into it. So how long are you doing this for? You're doing this for the rest of your life. You're doing this for the rest of your life, which comes to another issue that we'll have a conversation on another day. You've got to know the value of diversity and inclusion. You've got to recognize that while, you know, there is a sharing of power that has to occur, you've got to value that. You've got to see that I'm stronger when I'm together with someone else. I'm not strong by myself. You've got to recognize that as a human being, we are interdependent. We're created in that way. None of us are on an island. None of us makes it on our own. None of us can survive alone. That's unnatural. It's unnatural for us to think or to even consider living a life where we are completely on our own. That's not normal. That's not normal for a human being. In recognizing that, you have to acknowledge that we're stronger together. So when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, understanding what individuals who have been historically excluded are experiencing, and then insisting on bringing ourselves to a new place, because we're not trying to bring them in. We don't want to be brought in. We tried assimilation and we tried integration. We tried that, and it was absolutely horrible for us, okay? We need to create something altogether new. Because assimilation and integration means we've got to come in, we've got to fit into your system. And your systems are absolutely horrible for us, okay? They're absolutely horrible for you as well. They are. But you've got to understand the value of that and then immerse yourself into, and then it won't be difficult. I valued having my hair look good at the age of 12 years old. And so I learned everything I could about doing my hair. If there was nothing that anybody could talk about, when I was a teenager, it was Keisha's hair. She kept her hair done because it mattered to me. So I figured it out, okay? Same thing when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. When you value something, when you value people that don't look like you, when you value difference of opinion, when you value it, then it won't be hard to understand that you've got to immerse yourself in this stuff, okay? So how long does it take for us to, like I said, to understand diversity and inclusion, to become diverse and equitable individuals who think in that way? For you and your organizations, you know, you might be saying, you know, well, that might take a long time. You're right, it's gonna take some time. It's gonna take, how long has it taken us to get here? We're 460 plus years in. And if we want to just go back to Jim Crow, what, 1965, when it was 1967 or something like that, when it was finally, you know, illegalized. I forget the best word right now. I can't think of the right word. When I get to going, I can't remember all the words. When it finally became unlawful, Jim Crow, 65 years, what is that? What, 60 years ago? That's what, just 2 generations? You know, of when it was gone, but how long did it take to build that up? 200 something years of when slavery was abolished to when Jim Crow was finally decided that it's no longer lawful either. What, about 200 years of white supremacy reigning, and then we just been 60 years into trying to change, and 60 years of back and forth, more back than forth than anything. And we're thinking that we can bring in a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist for 1 year or for 6 months and think that we're going to change. That's not very smart. It's not very smart. It's going to take some time, which you know, on the opposite side, understanding that you're going to make mistakes and that it's going to be hard, and that, you know, you're going to have to, you know, dust yourself off and try again and make some serious apologies and actually do differently. That's going to occur. We recognize it. That's going to happen. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day. Slavery and abolishing it has never happened, but it won't happen overnight either. Okay. Because we went from slavery to mass incarceration. Okay, we went from enslaved to just free-ish, basically still slave, but kind of free, but not really. Okay, you know, and we'll get those later. But it's going to take some time, people. It's going to take some time. Okay, so how long does it take you to unlearn something? That's what this is talking about. We've got to unlearn. And a lot of that's through your education, through your, you know, coming onto this show, watching a meeting of diverse minds with Keisha Hamilton. You know, a lot of unlearning occurs when you're reading books that are helping you to unlearn things, that are giving you history. That process has to occur. But you should not be in the process of unlearning to the extent that you can't make some actual changes. Like as you're unlearning, think like, you know, when I was studying for Spanish, to try to understand Spanish, I had to try to speak the language at times. So in class, you know, we get some tests and you're looking at these different words, and I have to say, okay, well, what is hola? What's hello? Okay, so that's how that connects. Dos, that's 2. You know what I mean? Uno, dos, no, uno, dos, yeah, dos, that's 2. You know what I'm saying? At some point, you got to start practicing it with it. It should not take you, you know, 10 years of just sitting in your house reading and watching these videos. Now, that's good to do, but at some point, it should start manifesting itself in you, and other people should notice it. Okay, and the people around you. Let me tell your organizations, especially when you want to know, because so many white organizations, they're still not ready to give up their power. They're still not ready to give up their power. They're still not fully ready, but they're trying to get there. And a lot of times, I say, I don't want to be discouraging with the thoughts tonight, but sometimes it's like, oh, when we're in our organizations and white folks are determining or trying to make a decision on, you know, or trying to determine, you know, do we have it right? Are we in the right direction? A lot of times they don't ask the Black and brown individuals who are around them if they got it right, or if they're even in the right direction. They don't ask them. If you want to know if you're serious about understanding whether or not you're going in the right direction, whether or not that you know what ideas you have are right, one, you should be being guided by a paid consultant, you know, who looks different, thinks different, and is different than you. So first and foremost, you need a guide. You really do. Okay, we all need mentors. okay? In diversity, equity, and inclusion, your mentor just should be paid, okay? They just should be paid, okay? But first and foremost, you should be guided. And then secondly, those people who are in the organizations that you're in who are having to contend or work through your process, you know, so you superintendent, you CEO, you pastor, you parent, you know, grocery store owner, whoever you are, everybody that's around you, that you govern or that you have authority over, you know, the ones who you look to see if you're doing it right or not, excuse me, are your empowered Black and brown individuals. So let me be clear. What Black folks and brown folks do not do is tell you the truth, okay? Now, I'm not saying we liars at all. We are not liars, okay? We have learned how to survive. We are survivors, okay? We are survivors. If telling you the truth about whether or not you're doing a good job has proven, and we just can look and see it, you know, that Black person told him the truth, her the truth, and they got fired. So me, I ain't got nothing to do with that. They're gonna be asking me, how am I doing? I'm gonna say, if you really wanna know what you're doing and if you're doing it right, you need to make sure that the individuals that you're talking to are those who are most impacted by your lack of doing it right. So let me be clear. Whiteness, white supremacy, it primarily affects Black and brown individuals, primarily, okay? Now, we can have a conversation, and I do want to one day, about how it also affects poor people. And poor people encompasses a lot of people. I said poor people for a reason, poor people. You know, white poor people have been sold the lie that they're believing, and they stay poor, and they stay committed to white supremacy because they believe the lie, okay? But we'll talk about them later. But poor people, like I said, they've been sold this lie, but they're not the ones that you need to be asking if you're doing it right, because they still believe the lie and they're still upholding white supremacy. They gonna tell you to keep on doing it in a way that benefits them, because they're still trying to get to this lie that they think they can eventually grow into. If you want to know Black and brown white individuals, white organizations, you know, who are white led, if you're in the right direction or if you're doing it right, you go and talk to Black and brown individuals who have been empowered on your job to disagree with you, who have been empowered on your job to tell you the truth, okay? Like I said, we don't tell you the conversations that we have at the water fountain, you know, if they have those anymore, whatever those things are that they have where you fill up your water bottle, coffee counter, whatever people call them when they're in the organization. The conversations that Black and brown individuals have when they walk in each other's room and they close the door in each other's office, they're not the same conversation that we're gonna have with other people. Listen to me. You can have a Black person who's been your friend, your colleague, has been working with you for 20 years, and ask them some questions about how you're doing, and they're going to tell you that you're doing great. I cannot tell you how important it is for the Black and brown individuals who you are listening to, when you've got a culture where they're disagreeing with you, where they're saying, nope, that's not right. When the culture looks like that in your organizations, in your churches, and they recognize that there's not going to be any ramifications, that they're not going to lose their job, that they're going to still be able to feed their children, then when that occurs and they're telling you when you're doing wrong, then you're in the right direction. That's when you're in the right direction. So course correct. Course correct means you got to do something totally different. Okay, we want to talk about course correct tonight and how long it's going to take you to course correct. Course correct means that you're doing something completely different. It's not insanity, okay? Insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. If you're sitting at home and just simply reading stuff and nothing about your life is changing, you're sitting at home just watching these videos, and make sure you keep coming back, but you're doing nothing different. Your friends all look the same. Your timeline looks the same. Something doesn't start bothering you about these different things that you used to find okay. If none of that's happening, then you're not doing something right. You haven't course corrected. You haven't decided that I'm going to change this. You're not fully unlearning. You're not accepting any of this, and so it's not taking. Okay, and how long do you need to do that for? It's a lifetime. You need to be doing this for a lifetime. And how do you know when you're in the right direction of it? The Black and brown individuals who are most often around you, they finally become empowered. and they're comfortable with disagreeing with you. Okay, they're comfortable with telling you, no, you don't have it right. And not only that, you've got a mentor, a paid mentor that you're talking to who looks different. And this mentor needs to be the person who's disagreeing with you. You're going to need to be disagreed with. Trust me. This stuff is embedded in us. It's embedded in society. It's normalized. And so if somebody's not educated enough through personal experiences and then history to say, hey, look, that upholds white supremacy, and then come back on you and say, nope, you're wrong here. That upholds, and let me show you how it upholds. And if you're not willing to listen to them and hear them, then one, you're really off. But if you got your mentor and they're checking you, and then the people who are around you that you are over, they're empowered. The Black and brown people who are around you have been empowered to disagree with you, and they're disagreeing with you and checking the things that you do, then you know you're in the right direction. If that's not occurring, then you're not in the right direction. Okay, thank you so much for joining another meeting of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton. I appreciate you all joining me on Wednesdays. I love coming to talk to you all. But I do have to go tonight because it's just our time is up, and I will be back with you soon. I'm excited to announce that I've got some things coming up soon. So I'll announce just that. I've got some things coming up soon, and then I'll tell you what those are soon. But I appreciate you all for joining me. Remember to invite your family members and your friends. I am trying to grow this site because this information just needs to get out there. We want a better world, you know what I mean? And we can't have one when people just don't realize that, you know, you got to do differently and you got to do better, right? So I will see you all next week on Wednesday. Bye.